Have you ever gathered the correct ingredient and tried to cook following the recipe only to unintentionally make a mistake, so the meal doesn't turn out right? That is a bit like what happens with propositional fallacy in thinking and reasoning. Even if you start with the right fact, aka good ingredients, if your way of thinking, aka the recipe method, isn't right, you might end up with the wrong conclusion, aka the meal that doesn't turn out what you expected. So let's dive into this fallacy and see how they can trick us, just like a recipe that doesn't work out. Hi, I'm Xiaoshilo. Welcome to What People Also Ask, where I compile some fun fact to share with you, usually by conducting a lot of Googling. Today I want to talk about 3 propositional fallacy where the logical structure of an argument lead to false conclusions, even when the content of the argument might be partially correct. For each fallacy, I will give one everyday example, one historical example, and one example of Coke versus Pepsi, just for fun and to demonstrate the concept. So let's start by defining what are propositional fallacy. Propositional fallacy are a type of logical fallacy occurring in deductive reasoning, where errors in the logical structure of an argument lead to false conclusions, despite having true premise. These fallacies are distinct because they stem from errors in how proposition, aka statement that can be true or false, are combined or manipulated, not from the content of the premises themselves. They are considered formal fallacy, which means it's identifiable by examining the argument's form or structure rather than its content. Examples include affirming a disjunct, affirming the consequent, and denying the antecedent. Unlike other fallacies that might involve incorrect fact or irrelevant information, propositional fallacy highlights the critical importance of correct logical formulation in deductive reasoning, demonstrating how true premise can still lead to false conclusions if structured improperly. So let's talk about our first propositional fallacy. What is affirming a disjunct? Affirming a disjunct is a logical fallacy that occurs in the situation where there are 2 possibilities, aka disjuncts, and the confirmation of one is incorrectly taken to deny the other. This fallacy follows the format: A or B is true, A is true, therefore B is not true. It's a fallacy because both A and B could be true simultaneously. Everyday example, a person said it's raining outside, so either I take an umbrella or I will definitely get wet. Since I am taking an umbrella, it's impossible for me to get wet. This statement implies a false dichotomy, either taking an umbrella or getting wet, suggesting these outcomes are mutually exclusive. However, this is an oversimplification. In reality, taking an umbrella doesn't inherently prevent the possibility of getting wet, as other factors like wind can still lead to one getting wet. This fallacy lies in the assumption that by affirming one outcome, aka using an umbrella, the other, aka getting wet, become impossible. This example showcases a common logical error, where binary thinking obscures the possibility of overlapping or multiple outcomes. It highlighted the need to recognize that actions and consequences are often not strictly linear or exclusive, reminding us of the complexity and nuance in everyday scenarios. This fallacy demonstrates how easy it is to overlook this subtlety in our reasoning processes. Historical example, the debate between determinism and free will is a long-standing and central theme in philosophy, engaging numerous thinkers over the century. The long-standing philosophical debate between determinism and free will exemplifies the fallacy of affirming the disjunct. This discourse questioned whether human actions are predetermined or if the individual has the freedom to choose independently. The common misinterpretation is the oversimplified argument: either actions are determined or they result from free will. Since causality exists, free will does not exist. This binary perspective failed to consider the potential coexistence or complex interaction of this concept. Enlightenment thinkers like David Hume and Immanuel Kant plays pivotal roles in this debate. Hume's compatibilism suggests that causality's existence doesn't negate free will, while Kant's critique of pure reasoning proposed that free will could exist within moral actions, even in a deterministic physical world. The 20th century's resurgence of this debate, influenced by advancement in quantum mechanics and neuroscience, further questioned the strict dichotomy between determinism and free will. Philosophers like A.J. Ayer and Daniel Dennett explored the compatibility of this concept, suggesting a framework where deterministic and free will principles coexist. This debate's history highlights the error of affirming a disjunct, simplifying a nuanced issue into a binary choice, and overlooking the complexity and interplay between determinism and free will in human agency and cognition. Coke versus Pepsi example. A Coke enthusiast might declare, I love Coke, so it's impossible for me to enjoy Pepsi. This statement is an example of the logical fallacy known as affirming a disjunct. The error lies in the assumption that a preference for Coke inherently excludes the possibility of liking Pepsi. However, personal tastes are not mutually exclusive, and one can appreciate different brands for different qualities. On the other hand, a Pepsi supporter might argue, Pepsi is my absolute favorite, which means Coke must taste awful. This is another instance of affirming a disjunct. The belief that a fondness of Pepsi automatically translates to a disdain for Coke is a flawed conclusion. Preferences are subjective, and liking one product does not necessarily mean disliking its competitors. Both these instances show a common cognitive error where individuals mistakenly assume that their preferences for one option means an automatic rejection of the other. This fallacy overlooks the nuanced nature of personal taste and preferences. What is affirming the consequent? Affirming the consequent is a logical fallacy involving an incorrect inference from a conditional statement. It occurred when one reasoned that because the consequent, aka the then part of a conditional statement, is true, the antecedent, aka the if part, must also be true. This reasoning is flawed because it ignores other possible reasons for the consequent to be true. Everyday example, consider the statement, if it is raining, the ground will be wet. An instance of affirming the consequent will be, the ground is wet, therefore it must be raining. This conclusion is fallacious because there are other reasons the ground could be wet, such as sprinkler system or spill bucket of water. The wet ground doesn't necessarily mean it's raining. It's just consistent with what would be the case if it were raining. Historical example, the geocentric theory, rooted in ancient Greek philosophy, notably Aristotle's idea, posits Earth at the universe center, and was further developed by Ptolemy in his 2nd century work, Almagest. Ptolemy's model, integrating complex concepts like epicycle, became the prevailing astronomical view for over a millennium, intertwined with Christian theology in the Middle Ages and widely accepted in an Islamic and Christian scholarly circle. This theory's endurance exemplifies the fallacy of affirming the consequent. The observation that celestial bodies appear to revolve around Earth lead to erroneous conclusion that Earth must be the universe center. This reasoning assumed a direct causality from consequent to cause, without considering other possible explanations. The shift to the heliocentric model, initiated by Copernicus in the 16th century and solidified by Kepler in Galileo's 17th century findings, challenged this fallacy. Their work provided evidence that directly contradicted the geocentric view, demonstrating the peril of affirming the consequent in scientific inquiry, and highlighting how entrenched beliefs, both religious and philosophical, can hinder the acceptance of new paradigms. Coke and Pepsi examples. A Coke enthusiast might say, if soda refreshes you, it must be Coke. You feel refreshed, so you must have had Coke. This argument is flawed, because feeling refreshed can result from various sodas, not exclusively Coke. The supporter is erroneously asserting that the effect, feeling refreshed, confirms the cause, drinking Coke, disregarding other potential explanations. Similarly, a Pepsi advocate might argue, a bold taste soda is definitely Pepsi. These sodas have bold taste, so it must be Pepsi. This is a fallacious reasoning because boldness in taste can be attributed to many other sodas, not just Pepsi. A Pepsi supporter is mistakenly affirming the effect, bold taste, is definitive indicator of the cause being Pepsi, which is an oversimplification of the possible cause for a bold taste in sodas. What is denying the antecedent? Denying the antecedent is a logical fallacy that occurs when, from a conditional statement, one incorrectly infers that if the antecedent, aka the if part, is false, then the consequent, aka the then part, must also be false. This form of reasoning is flawed because the consequent can still be true even if the antecedent is false. Everyday example. Someone said, if I study hard, I will pass the exam. I don't study hard, so I will not pass the exam. This reasoning is fallacious because there are other ways to pass the exam besides studying hard. such as already knowing the material or making educated guesses. The absence of studying doesn't necessarily guarantee a failure. It just negates one specific path to success. This example demonstrates the error in concluding that the failure of the condition starting hard automatically leads to the failure of the outcome, passing the exam. Historical example, Euclidean geometry dating back to around 300 BC, with the Greek mathematician Euclid, formed the foundation of geometric understanding through his work, Elements. A central aspect of Euclidean geometry is the parallel postulate, stating that parallel lines never intersect. However, a historical misinterpretation, particularly in the early study of geometry, involves the logical fallacy of denying the antecedent. This fallacy manifests in the incorrect belief that if two lines are not parallel, they must intersect, neglecting the possibility of skew lines in three-dimensional space, which are non-parallel, yet do not intersect as they lie in different planes. This early misconception underscored a limited understanding of geometry, primarily confined to two dimensions. The later development and formalization of three-dimensional geometry clarified this misunderstanding. Further advancement in 18th and 19th century by mathematicians like Gauss, Riemann, and Lobachevsky, who explored non-Euclidean geometry, significantly broadened the scope of geometric principles beyond Euclid's original framework. This evolution of mathematical thought highlights the dynamic nature of the field and the ratification of misconceptions through deeper investigation and expanded perspective. Coke versus Pepsi example. The Coke enthusiast named Clara was known for her unwavering belief in the superiority of Coca-Cola. One sunny afternoon, while sitting in a local cafe, she declared, "If a drink is Coke, then it's undoubtedly delicious." However, when the waiter brought a tray of Sprite for the table next to them, Clara scoffed, "Since Sprite is not Coke, it cannot possibly be delicious." Across the town, Peter, a die-hard Pepsi fan, was equally staunch in his opinion. He said, "If a drink is Pepsi, it's the epitome of refreshment," he proclaimed at a neighborhood barbecue. When his friend offered him a chilled glass of Fanta, Peter said, "Since that is not Pepsi, it can't be refreshing." In both scenarios, Clara and Peter were victims of the logical fallacy known as denying the antecedent. They each believed if a drink wasn't their preferred brand, it couldn't possess quality like deliciousness or refreshment. These beliefs create a rift in their understanding of the vast world of flavor beyond the realm of Coke and Pepsi.